Looks like it's back to the ballot box in Spain, where it's once again the tale of a major European power where support for the two traditional center-left and center-right blocs has splintered into political gridlock. We'll see why Pedro Sanchez's socialists failed to get their budget through parliament and how a decade after the financial crisis battered Spain, voters are turning to new faces, be they from the far left Podemos, the liberal Ciudadanos, and for the first time, the far-right Vox party, which just won seats in Andalusia. At the other end of the country, there's Catalonia, with the start of the 3-month trial of 12 separatist leaders, while sovereignists outside the courthouse shouted treasoners at the defendants. Separatists in Barcelona, who disagree amongst themselves about much of everything else, are united in denouncing what they see as a political trial. Where does the common ground lie, be it in Barcelona or in Madrid? How do you find it today in the France 24 debate? We're asking what's wrong with Spain and its politics. Joining us to talk about it, Tony Fernandes, Vice Chair of the European chapter of the Spanish Socialist Party. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Miricia Borrell is with us, Director General for Foreign Relations of the Catalan government. Thank you for visiting us here in Paris.
Thank you.
Also with us, attorney and commentator Jean-Marc Sanchez. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening, François.
And attorney and commentator Eduard Salsas. How are you, sir?
Good evening. Very good.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate. Yeah, Friday's the date of the weekly cabinet meeting in Madrid, and that is when Pedro Sanchez is expected to call Spain's third general election in 4 years. Peter O'Brien has the story.
A budget rejected and a rethink required.
The amendments are approved and the 2019 budget proposal is rejected.
Pedro Sanchez's government has accused Conservatives and Catalan separatists of blocking a budget that included social spending measures as well as an increased investment in Catalonia. With little parliamentary support, Sanchez could call early elections instead of presenting a revised budget. This could mean a right-wing majority in parliament. Conservatives accuse the socialist government of treason for negotiating with Catalonia's separatist executive, as Madrid has been trying to ease tensions with the region. The Catalan foreign minister was asked on France 24 if separatists made the right move in rejecting the budget, given that new elections could usher in a government that's less willing to negotiate.
Perhaps there could be a vote, we don't know. He can just renew the budget from last year. That's a possible move. In fact, Mr. Sanchez suggested that a couple of months ago.
Separatist leaders are on trial for their role in the 2017 attempt to make Catalonia an independent republic. And on Friday, negotiations between Madrid and the Catalan government broke down.
Tony Fernandes, our correspondent in Madrid, Sarah Morris, she sort of killed the suspense earlier. She said there isn't going to be a second vote on the budget. There's going to be early elections, right?
Well, I mean, I would say that it's speculating right now, because I think the person that can decide on this issue is the president. And, so far there has not been any announcement on this in this regard. It's obviously one of the options to call for elections, but, the situation at the moment is quite complex. So, I mean, you cannot rule out that, the government decides otherwise.
Why was the budget rejected?
I think that the burden of explaining why it was rejected falls, on the opposition parties. I think that the government, did its homework by, putting forward a budget which was balanced from a sound, fiscal policy point of view, and at the same time had a clear, objective of reducing inequalities by, adopting measures in favor of, workers, in favor of government workers, trying to modernize the economy. So I think that the burden now of explaining this either, in the political agenda or if there are elections during the campaign falls on, both the conservative parties and, the pro-independence political parties.
Miricia Borrell, in that report we saw your boss there, he seemed pretty sure that, there's going to be a second vote. There won't be early elections by the sound of what he's saying.
Well, now it looks like things have changed a bit, and so as Tony Fernandes said, it's a bit of an speculation right now, but it's quite possible that there's an early election or a snap election.
So will there be regrets by nationalists to have rejected that budget?
Well, I don't think it in terms of regret. So one thing we have to bear in mind is that the Sanchez government is here thanks to the pro-independence parties that voted for the no confidence vote. What I think the Sanchez government has forgotten during this time is that there is the elephant in the room here, which is a political trial awaiting, and that is ongoing right now. We've tried to negotiate, but to no avail so far.
So this no vote is about the trial of those 12 separatists.
I think that there's two separate things here. So there is, as I said, the elephant in the room is the political trial, and it's the political situation in Catalonia. We are always open to dialogue, and this is what we've said to the Spanish government. There were negotiations last week, but they were halted by the Spanish government. We don't think, of course, the budget is absolutely relevant, but we think that when we gave the vote in the no confidence vote, of course, that in a way it wasn't for free. We wanted dialogue. We wanted things to move on. So, yeah.
Is that how you see it, Jean-Marc Sanchez? That's why the no vote took place? It doesn't have to do so much with spending in 2019?
Well, I think everything is combined. At the end of the day, a great name does not make a long-lasting president, actually. And I think that Pedro Sanchez is suffering from different things. He was only elected with the support of 13 other parties, including the independentists, not only from Catalonia, but also. And one of the threshold he could not go beyond was the blackmailing of part of them, saying, if you don't abide by what you've promised, they will not support you any further. I mean, remember, the vote of the budget was impeached first, and there is a possibility in Spain that you can keep going along with the vote of the budget that was voted in the prior government. So it was quite a schizophrenic situation. Sanchez was governing with a budget voted by the present government of Manuel Rajoy, trying to please all and every party he had to deal with, including the Catalans, with only 84 MPs in the parliament. So he didn't have a majority. He had less MPs than the proper Partido Popular is fighting against. So I think it's a combination of different things. The opposition of the right-wing parties, the independentists situation, and also the trial, of course. All that has created a very complex situation for him.
Eduard Salsas, this is a mix of things that explains this no vote?
I think that it is a mix of things with the different allies that Pedro Sanchez had in that no confidence vote of last year. What I think that, and it's pretty puzzling from Pedro Sanchez, is that he thought that he could be the prime minister without giving any concessions to any of his partners, any of the parties that voted for his...
He says he increased spending the way that the left likes it.
Well, as far as I know, or last time I checked, the separatist parties were not asking for that. They were asking for a dialogue on the issue of self-determination. I mean, I don't know if Spain should or should not engage in a dialogue on self-determination, but at least that's what they asked him, and that's why he got their votes. So 1 year later, negotiations have not even started. They have not even agreed on the fact of starting negotiations. So at the end of the day is, well, 1 year later, something should have happened, and it did not happen. So I don't know why Pedro Sanchez is surprised.
Tony Fernandes?
Well, I have to say I disagree with a number of facts. I have to say that, last year when there was the no confidence vote in the Spanish parliament,
which brought down the Rajoy government.
Exactly. It was, first of all, a vote to restore dignity in government. Let's not forget that, the Conservative Party had been, condemned by courts as being responsible for corruption charges. So I think that, Pedro Sanchez, took the initiative of, trying to gain support from the parliament. But of course, it's a very divided parliament. I think that we are sometimes living in denial.
But to answer Edward's point, why haven't these negotiations begun?
I was coming to that point. I think that negotiations and dialogue was restored as well. I mean, because the government was trying to restore normality in the institutional relationship between the Catalan government and the Spanish government, which was something which had been, all the bridges had been broken during Rajoy's government. And I think that, I don't think that, dialogue did not took place. I think that it actually took place, except that, one of the parties was imposing conditions which were not acceptable. Again,
which one?
Bringing to the table to negotiate the budget, the right to self-determination, which is something that is not foreseen in the Constitution, I would say is mixing up subjects which cannot be reconciled, especially because you're living in denial. I think that this is really the term that defines the situation. On the one hand, you have conservative parties that are living in denial that the situation has changed, and today you have to build coalitions, you have to build consensus in parliament in order to govern. This is going to be the situation no matter what, be it with elections or without elections. And on the other hand, you have the separatist parties who are living in denial that they do not represent the whole Catalonia. They are only representing even less than half of the Catalans. So trying to impose such a constitutional change without having first a consensus within your own territory is a bit far-fetched, I would say.
So it's back to square one. There's the calendar. You had the beginning of this trial on Tuesday. It's going to last 3 months. Of those 12 separatist leaders, they face some of them up to 17 years behind bars. If the trial hadn't started this week, would this budget have passed?
I'm not a fortune teller, so I actually don't know about that. But
did it basically make everybody freeze up politically and say, no, we can't do business right now because of the start of this trial?
Well, I think it's not that much about the start of the trial, but it is about negotiation, right? And so in this sense, I disagree a bit with the words that are being put.
You heard Tony say, you on the one hand, there's the budget. On the other hand, there's the status of Catalonia. And there's two different things.
Well, I think the trials and the situation in Catalonia is really a situation about human rights. So I don't think we can just stop talking about human rights to talk about the budget. What's going on is actually that the political trials, so these people are charged with rebellion, with sedition, just to allow a vote, so to put the ballot boxes, to allow a debate and a vote in the parliament, and to try to persuade people to go home after a massive demonstration. So I don't think we can just put this aside and start talking about economics. Economics are important, but I think human rights are more important than that. And in this sense, and if I can answer a bit to what has been said just right now, we're not imposing anything. We're asking for dialogue. And what negotiation means is that there's two sides on the table thinking very different things, and then we try to negotiate. So we can't start the negotiation just by agreeing, because otherwise it wouldn't be a negotiation. It would just be an agreement, right? We're not imposing anything. We're just saying we have a different position. Let's talk about this around the table.
Jean-Marc Sanchez, do you take the point that it's difficult to approve the budget from a government when your own leadership is being put on trial for rebellion?
It's not difficult, it's impossible. According to the Spanish institutions, you can only postpone the former budget once, but then you have, and it's very specific to Spain, to present each and every year to the parliament the budget, presupuesto in Spanish, not only for the whole country, but for the local regions. And this is extremely important due to the organization of a country. Catalonia and the Basque Country, for instance, have far more power than others. And the financing of the local entities has always been a very crucial issue in Spain since the very beginning. So I understand the point that you cannot actually put aside human rights. But of course, it's bad time for Pedro Sanchez, and especially at this time of the vote of the budget. I think that the combination of a protest on Sunday afternoon, where 50,000 or 250,000, depending on his point of view, have been protesting against him, and they actually end up to get exactly what they wanted to, having him resign. I don't believe he will probably postpone the discussions, because if he would have done it, he could have done it before. Since the protest on Sunday, according to an official report, he did not try to maintain the discussion with his former allies, which means that he knew already since Sunday that it would be impossible to please either one part of Spain or the other. So I think, to answer your questions, it's not difficult. It's totally impossible for him. There is no exit route. So the only way would be to call for new elections. That's probably what's going to happen. And he should give a date, either April 17 or April 24, within the end of this week.
And he'll give the date, and then what happens? Is it the same minorities? There won't be a clear majority, just like we saw with the last two times the Spanish went to the polls?
Well, I think we will have a worse scenario than 2 years ago, because 2 years ago we had a lot of parties in the parliament. This time we will have a new party. We'll have the far right. And this is a tragedy for Spain. It is a tragedy, and I mean my words. It's for the first time in the democratic history of Spain, we will have an extreme right party claiming for having xenophobic purposes or anti-abortion.
And whose fault is that?
Well, there's no fault. There's no fault. This is democracy. People vote what they want, and if this party is in the parliament, it's the failure of all the other political parties, regardless if they are left or right. The left has been incapable, as we were saying before, of engaging in a dialogue to try to find a negotiated solution to the Catalan problem. The right has been inflating this Spanish nationalism, this unity nationalism. We're seeing the images full of Spanish flags. I have never seen so many Spanish flags. So in a way, it's a failure of all the political class.
Tony Fernandes, there's a different mood right now in Spain.
Well, I think that, I disagree a bit because, of course, somehow it's a collective responsibility, but I would say that you have the two extremes. On the one hand, you have the conservatives, I agree, that have been waving the flags against other citizens just because they had different political options, which I think is very responsible, because this is clearly fueling, far-right feelings, which is obviously not welcome. And on the other hand, you have, the pro-independence political party who has been putting pressure on a government, on things which are not possible in a democracy. I mean, you cannot ask the government to put pressure on judiciary. I mean, there's a separation of powers. Spain, is a consolidated democracy where, the government cannot, interfere into criminal proceedings. And as naive as that may sound, I think that it's something that is very keen to democracy. So we cannot speak of human rights if you are yourself incurring in the paradox of asking the government of interfering into criminal proceedings. I think that the government could do
a political trial or not. We'll pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. In Spain, the budget rejected. Pedro Sanchez's minority government will have a cabinet meeting on Friday, and it's looking more than likely that there may be a call for a third election in 4 years in Spain. With us to talk about it, Tony Fernandes, vice chair of the European chapter of the Spanish Socialist Party, the PSO. How do you pronounce it in English? What do you say? Do you say? Would you use the acronym? Do you say PSO? How do you say it?
Well, let's keep it simple. Socialist Party.
Socialist Party. Okay, there we go. Miricia Borrell, Director General of Foreign Relations for Catalonia's government here in Paris this Wednesday. Attorney and commentator Jean-Marc Sanchez, attorney and commentator Eduard Salsas. We were talking about in part one of our discussion. Tuesday saw the opening day of the trial of 12 Catalan separatist leaders, a 3-month trial. 9 of them are charged with rebellion. Leading the group, Oriol Junqueras, who was number 2 of the government in Barcelona when separatists staged that banned independence referendum in October of 2017. They later declared independence from the rest of Spain. That's what prompted the arrests. Junqueras in the dock in Madrid. While the president of Catalonia, on Tuesday was at the Berlin Film Festival. Carles Puigdemont, who's been living in exile in the Brussels suburb of Waterloo, Spain doesn't stage trials in absentia, so he's not formally charged. What do you make of that contrast, Maria Borrell, that there you have Junqueras facing the music while Puigdemont's at a film festival?
Well, I think what it really shows is that there's something really wrong with the legal system and the judiciary system in Spain. Because what we see is that Mr. Puigdemont was facing extradition charges, and the sort of jury, I don't quite know the word, of Schleswig-Holstein, they rejected. Magistrates rejected the extradition charges and only allowed it for embezzlement or misappropriation of funds. So they didn't see any sign of rebellion in there. And instead, in here, as I said earlier on, Junqueras and the other pro-independence leaders are accused of rebellion just for putting the ballot boxes. So I think this is what is clearly shown by this contrast.
Have the German courts shown up the Spanish jurisdictions on this?
Well, as far as I know, there are exchange of information. So it's very interesting to go through the judgment of the Schleswig-Holstein court. And basically they said, even if there was a rebellion, is there any violence? So according to the local criteria, if there is no equivalent in the local German law, they could not sentence Carles Puigdemont. And that's what they did at the end of the day. If I may come back to two things. Eduard said before what's going to be the terrible future of Spain with a far-right party that was elected in Andalusia. That's a collateral damage of what happened in the rest of Spain. I mean, part of the people who voted for them voted also against what's happening in Catalonia. I'm not saying they did right or wrong, but it's part of the answer. And another thing that Tony Fernandes will probably not tell you, because that's something that everybody knows, neither the Socialist Party nor the Partido Popular will ever give Catalonia any more flexibility to get to the independence. They are national parties and they abide by the Constitution. And the Constitution says that the Spanish nation is indivisible. The problem is that some people believe there is a Spanish nation and others not. So this is the question. Can we change the rules of the game? Can we change the Constitution? Because it's the same rule since 1978. And if we keep going the same way, I mean, what is next step? Next step will be a new government, which will be even harder on negotiating on Catalonia independence. That will be probably a conservative coalition between Partido Popular, Ciudadanos, and eventually Vox, as you mentioned before, Eduard. But are we going to get out of it? I'm not sure. I'm afraid not.
But is it down to the former prime minister, the conservative leader Mariano Rajoy, deciding to play hardball when there was that referendum staged the previous time around? The government had more or less ignored it.
Even before that.
And this time, deciding to play hardball. Did he provoke all of this?
Probably. I think there was some kind of provocation on both sides. And I do agree on that point. Things could have been different if 10 years ago, at the time, Catalonia got more freedom in 2006, and especially after the judgment of the Supreme Court on the local Catalan constitution, the Statute, things could have changed. It was time to talk. Now, maybe it's not too late, but it's going to be more and more difficult now.
Yeah, the question is, can you do the talking when there's this trial going on, a political trial or not? Well, it depends who you ask.
It's not a political trial. In Spain, we have a separation of powers, like in France. Democracy in Spain is very high in international rankings, much higher than some other European countries. The trial will follow judicial guidelines and procedure. Political opinions won't be judged. The accusations will.
That trial that has started in Madrid this morning is a test for the whole judiciary Spanish system. All democracies around the world must be inspired by the Catalan struggle for democracy. And the image of our civil and political leaders on trial concerns all of who believes in a stronger democracy.
And we're seeing again on social media the polarization that we saw back in 2017. One reaction of a viewer here, it's not just Catalan separatists, democracy is also on trial in Spain. Tony Fernandes, is democracy on trial?
I don't think so. I think that, what happens is that, again, we're living a bit in denial with this type of statements because, I think that the Socialist Party has taken the stance of trying to acknowledge the reality, which is that the Catalan society is very divided. There are pro-independence people, so it's not just a bunch of people now sitting on the Supreme Court bench who are lunatics that are not supported. Of course, there's an important part of Catalan society backing this pro-independence movement. So you cannot deny reality. You have to face it, and I think that the socialist government has tried to restore dialogue, institutional dialogue, of course, within the constitution and within the rule of law. And one of the assumptions of this rule of law is that you cannot interfere into the trial, even if there are politicians or former politicians sitting in the bench being accused. I think that saying that this is a political trial is just, simplifying reality, and I think it's not something that is acceptable because, all the guarantees have been afforded to the people sitting in the bench. Therefore, I think that what the Spanish government has to do is to respect judicial independence.
Miricia Borrell?
Well, several things in here. So when there's so much the need to say and state and go abroad and say Spain is a full democracy and repeat it time and again, it's sort of suspicious in a way. There's been this marketing campaign, and this is the marketing parties.
There's been briefings of journalists at various Spanish embassies in Europe.
Exactly, yeah. So then I think when there is the need of this marketing campaign, that means that there's something fishy in there. And
so what are you thinking? That the Supreme Court speaks to the government, that there's some kind of collusion?
I think the judiciary system in Spain, we can't say that the whole of the judiciary system is rotten, but there's clearly something very wrong in there. And we wished that there was true independence and that the judiciary system wasn't that conservative. What we are not doing is putting pressure on the judiciary system. And if you allow me one more thing, you always talk about dialogue within the constitution. I think dialogue can be about anything, really. And to talk about self-determination is within the constitution. And actually, this is not a legal matter, it's a political matter. The same constitution has 2 articles at least that allow for referendums to be done and to be made. So it's not a legal matter, it's a political matter. There's no political will whatsoever from the government.
Of course, the point is that, I think that this is something very simple to explain. Just when you don't have the majority, within democracy, when you don't have the qualified majority required to change certain rules, what you cannot do is to take the board with you home and say, well, since, I cannot prevail with these rules, I will change the rules on my own. That's the point. Of course, you can debate, and of course, you can express yourself in favor. These are political claims which are legitimate. So I think the socialist government has not been denying that. Trying to close the eyes before the reality, but I don't think that you can be above the law, which is a bit what we're now judging. Whether these people allegedly believe themselves to be above the law and being able to breach rules or court decisions that had been very clear and explicit.
Eduard Salsas, is it basically game over now for 3 months during the whole time of this trial that there's not going to be any breakthrough, there's not going to be any dialogue? And
well, I think that there's not going to be any dialogue. The Socialist Party has just surrendered to the demands of the right wing parties and extreme right parties in Spain. This dialogue that my fellow colleague across the table is saying, it's not such a dialogue with the Catalan government. It's just the ordinary administration. Both the regional administration and the central administration are bound to meet and to discuss ordinary matters. So there has not been such an extraordinary negotiation on self-determination or the political demands of the Catalan government. And in a way, what Tony Fernandes will not tell you is that the Socialist Party and the Popular Party have been nominating and have been distributing the seats in the Supreme Court for the last 30 years. And how come all the journalists and all the lawyers, we can, foresee in advance the solutions and the rulings of the Supreme Court, depending on who's sitting in on that court and on that precise case. This is somehow
But everywhere Supreme
shocking.
Courts, why is it shocking? Everywhere Supreme Courts are justices are named by politicians in every country.
Well, not in every country. Not in every country. Not all
Well,
the
in
Supreme...
France, the United States.
Well, in France, you have a part of the Conseil Général de la Magistrature, which is elected by the
I'm talking
president.
about the Constitutional Court.
And the Constitutional Court is not the relevant tribunal in France. It's the Cour de Cassation, which is the important one, and it's the equivalent for the Supreme Court. And in this case, some of the members are elected by the judges themselves. In this way, probably in other countries, the members of the Supreme Court are elected by political parties, but not the political parties are not caught texting one to another saying, I'm going to control this room of the Supreme Court, you're going to be controlling the other ones. And I'm quoting textually a text message from one of the political parties, from the Partido Popular.
Conservative Partido Popular can reply to that type of thinking. I think it's a very dangerous proposition, what you're saying, because then how can you explain that prominent members of the Conservative Party, who, let's not forget, was the government who launched these criminal proceedings, or at least during the time where they were in office, the proceedings were launched. How can you explain that prominent members of this political party are now in jail or being, indicted for corruption charges? I think that, claiming that the Spanish judicial system, of course, as every system, it can be perfected and improved. But I don't think that, those are legitimate charges in terms of independence or getting a fair trial. I think that, you have all the appeals available as any other citizen. What it would be wrong, I think, is believing that just because you have certain political claims, you can, be above, the rules or be able to disobey, court orders. Especially when, in a situation like the one, let's not forget, because sometimes you have the impression that, there's a very romantic situation, people oppressed and so on. Well, in Catalonia, there's only half of the society, half of the parliament that is in favor of independence. So claiming that, there's a full, territory that is being oppressed and being denied the rights, I think is oversimplifying things.
Let's try to take a broader view on this, okay? Because you have, whatever you may think, Tony's correct, you have a splintered parliament in Barcelona, a regional parliament. It's 47%, I believe, of the vote, which was for separatists, and they have a slim majority in number of seats. In Madrid, as Edward was saying, if there is a snap election, it's going to be even more splintered than it was before. At the end of the day, is this just all the consequences of that financial crisis of 2008? That the country is still... people are fed up with a situation where they haven't gotten back to the spending power they had before, and they're looking wherever they can.
I think this is an oversimplification of what's going on, and it has been pointed out before that there's been, I think the fundamental problem in here is a gradual and by now complete loss of trust from a big part of the Catalan society on the Spanish state, the Spanish government and the Spanish judiciary system. This started
But if it wasn't for the independence drive, that loss of confidence, would it not be directed at the regional government itself? It's a coalition, right, that goes from the center right, I believe, all the way to the far left. What do they agree on besides the fact that they want independence?
So the coalition government now works, I'd say, pretty well. But of course, I'm part of this government, so I might be a bit biased. But I think it does work. So aside from talking about independence and reopening delegations, we also govern. So we also talk about how to face the refugee crisis, for example. We talk about education. So we do govern. We do more things than talking about that. But we have to admit, this is, it's a huge trial. It's having a lot of impact around the world, and we can't just ignore it. So it's the first sort of homework that we have and we need to solve.
Jean-Marc Sanchez?
It will take time. It will be difficult. I mean, I'm watching the images just behind you, François. It's Plaça Catalunya in Barcelona. And it shows that there is a large minority, or maybe half of the people in Catalonia, who don't want to play the game any longer according to the old rules. So the next step is what's going to happen. I mean, we will all disagree probably upon many things, but what really concerns us as Spaniards is, or members of this territory, whether you consider yourself being Spaniard or Catalan or both, is what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that what's going to happen tomorrow is going to be any better than what happened yesterday. I mean, the crisis probably was even tougher in Spain than anywhere else in Europe. And Spain just...
And politicians were complicit,
course,
right? In giving out loans for
of course,
housing.
and the banks also.
The banks, but also the savings and loans, which are tied to politicians.
I had a partner, he had a 50-year loan, and he was 50. When he got that loan, it was a 125% loan. So he knew he will never be able to reimburse that. I mean, Spain has been living on credit for a long time, since basically 40 years. But if we go any further than this, then we come back to the very beginning. Why are we here? I mean, why Spain is that complex? Why is that so fabulous country with so many resources that attract so many people ungovernable? Because of history, and it will take probably one other debate to explain what happened since 500 years. But I'm sure that all my fellow companions tonight...
We could start in 1978.
Probably we can keep going each and every day, François, if you want it. But this is a real story. I mean, this is the story of the two Spains. And the two Spains are facing each other, and they keep facing each other ever and ever.
Right.
And that's the real problem.
Maybe there's a white knight. Last weekend saw a rally of sovereignists in Barcelona, everyone from the far right to the center left. Now, in among the crowd, a face that will be familiar to French audiences.
Estado de Derecho, la independencia de la justicia, la organización de España con autonomías increíbles, pero también la unidad del país, y es eso lo más importante. Y aquí, pues la gente, los españoles, lo dicen, son muchos, lo dicen en Barcelona, lo dicen en Madrid, y es muy importante que todos estemos juntos para decirlo.
Edward, how's the former French Prime Minister's Spanish?
Well, he was born in Barcelona. He was born. That's I'm giving a fact, a curiosity. He was born in the street of Salsas, because there's a street in Barcelona called Salsas, and Manuel Valls was born in that street. So he was born in Barcelona. He went to Paris, to France. He did a lot of politics. He became Prime Minister of France, and now he has come back to Barcelona to try to be the mayor of Barcelona.
And how is his Spanish? You didn't answer my question.
Well,
He speaks good Catalan.
he speaks good Catalan.
As far as I can tell.
People in Barcelona are telling me that he might have a chance, not because he's the best thing since sliced toast, but because he's not tainted with scandals and problems that some of the others are.
Well, he's like the new guy in scene. So the election for the mayor of Barcelona will be a tough election. There are many candidates, many well-known candidates who are running for that post, and I think that Ada Colau is popular. The current mayor is very popular. The former Councillor of Foreign Affairs, Ernest Maragall, who's the brother of former mayor of Barcelona, Pasqual Maragall, a very prestigious mayor in Barcelona, is also running for that post. So he may have some chances, but it will be a tough fight.
Maria Burrell, what do you make of Manuel Valls?
Not much, really. I mean, I was quite shocked that having been in Barcelona or living in Barcelona, it seemed to me that he just appeared out of nowhere, and I don't think he has chances to win. But I think what's most striking is that he is pairing with a party that claims to be liberal.
Ciudadanos.
Exactly, but it's not quite. It's a party that was born out of a negation, so sort of no independence or no education in Catalan. So I'm not quite sure why would he pair up with this party.
He comes from the French Socialist Party originally. Do you consider him one of yours, Tony Fernandes?
Well, it's difficult to consider him one of ours now that he's demonstrating in Spain, with far-right political party.
He said, look, the far right's at the demonstration, but so are a lot of other people.
Well, I think that it would be a difficult proposition, especially when he comes from a country where, let's say somehow the political party of the president here, it would be difficult to find him in a picture, or at least the leader of the centrist or so-called centrist political party would be in the same picture as Marine Le Pen. I think that that's very difficult to sustain, and I think that's the major paradox or contradiction that he's running into. I mean, trying to present himself as someone in a liberal party like Ciudadanos, when they are now building a government coalition in Andalusia with the far right. I think that's very difficult to reconcile. And if I may, I think that, we've been talking about a number of issues like the financial crisis and how this can be explaining some of the social unrest, in Catalonia. Well, I have to say that not every party has been in the same box. I mean, not only in the roots of the financial crisis, because let's remember that, for a big chunk of this period, the Conservatives were in power and they were fueling the real estate bubble that led us to the crisis. And now, I mean, even during this very difficult
the socialists were in power in regional governments too, and they had friends at savings and loans, and I mean, it's both sides, right?
Well, I think there's obviously a collective responsibility in a number of events, but I would say that, the major, leading factor of the crisis in Spain was the real estate, and that was clearly fueled by, legislation that was passed by the Conservative Party, fueling, speculation over real estate. And today, when you have no longer a bipartisan political system with only, socialist and conservative in parliament, I think that the socialist government has been taking up its challenge of trying to build new coalitions, which is something that mostly no other party has been doing, because they are always, claiming that only their let's say, ideas or propositions are valid. So I think that this is a very important factor that needs to be underlined.
All right, yeah. Okay, so the jury divided, let's say, on whether or not a former French prime minister can become mayor of Barcelona. More broadly for Spain, who can be the white knight in all of this?
Well, I really don't know. As far as the former French prime minister is concerned, I'm supposed to see him next week, so I will ask him. Yes, so maybe I'll get some fresh news when I'll be back on France 24. I'll be happy to share it with you.
Tell them about Salsa Street.
Of course, I will recall that.
Okay, just more broadly, there are our correspondent Sarah Morris telling us that opinion polls suggest that the ruling socialists would fare better if the election were held tomorrow, but because the far-left Podemos' support would slide, again, we're back to this gridlock.
Well, the last polls say that the socialists would be first, but they would lack of allies in the left wing. So without the Catalans, without the separatists, this coalition of left parties lacks of 15 to 20 seats, and on the other side, the Popular Party, the Ciudadanos, and the far right party Vox, if they manage to conclude a coalition, they would have a majority of these seats. In any case, I think that for these past years we've been discussing about the rules and about these rules in Spain and about what we agree and we don't agree. I think that in '78 we agreed on fundamental rights, and everything can be discussed if fundamental rights are respected. And at this point, now, regardless of what you think of independence, it's not about independence anymore. It's about procedural rights, it's about fundamental rights, and it's about complying with these rights and respecting the rights of the people who are accused in this political trial.
All right, and it's going to play out. It's going to play out as early as Friday when that cabinet meets. I want to thank you, Eduard Salsas. I want to thank as well Maria Burrell. I want to thank as well Jean-Marc Sanchez, Tony Fernandes. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.